Welcome, everyone. My name is Nick Fire.
And I'm Marc the Truth.
And this is another episode of the FireTruth Nerdcast, your somewhat weekly podcast. We don't hit it every week, but we get pretty close. Things come up, We both work full-time jobs and stuff. So hopefully one day we can get more of a consistent schedule, which would be nice if we start making it big out here on this YouTube and Spotify. But for now, how are you doing this week?
I'm good. It's been an interesting week. I won't go into too much detail, but we had a day at the bar that was just very eventful. There was a lot of drunk people and then having to get someone home, and they gave us the wrong address, and then we had to get them an Uber, and then they had to come back and get their car the next day. And then I was in charge of a bar hopping type situation. So they came to our bar for like 30 minutes, hung out, and then they were going to another bar. So I was in charge of, making sure that they paid, they got all their drinks, they had fun. And that led me to not get home until like 9:30. Other than that, it's been good. How about you?
I got a desk, so I'm feeling great right now. If you guys, obviously you guys don't know because we don't have video. I have been standing in my room doing this podcast, and it has been horrible. I mean, my feet endurance, fucking ridiculous now, okay? But I'm just saying, standing on my toes for 3 hours and then editing and all that, it's been a horrible.
You stand when you edit too?
I've been standing, writing, editing, everything. It's been miserable.
So you're going to do that all at the desk now, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
I can finally sit my fat ass down. So it's great. Great on the toes. I'm loving life again. Anyways, let's get into why we're really here. To talk about one of the most beloved films in history. 1977's breakout Star Wars, which was then retitled Episode 4, A New Hope. Now, Marc, we're both millennials here, so we were definitely not around when A New Hope came out in theaters originally. When was the first time that you remember seeing it, and how did you feel about it when you first did?
I want to say the first Star Wars movie I saw was Return of the Jedi. Then I think I had watched the movie like multiple days in a row, nonstop. And then my dad was like, hey, you know that there's 2 that came out before that, right? And I was a little kid, so I was like, no. So I think he went out and got the VHS like box set or whatever. And that's when I watched A New Hope. And I was like, okay, now I know who these characters are. It makes a little bit more sense. But as a kid, like I really didn't put 2 and 2 together. But like that intro scene as a kid, I was like, oh, wow, that ship's fucking huge. And then I was like, oh my God, who the fuck is this dude? He's got a red sword light up thing and he's fucking people up, and then he just chokes some guy. Like, the fuck is going on? And then from there, the rest is history. Now it's everything Star Wars I must watch and consume.
For me, I'm pretty sure A New Hope is the first Star Wars movie that I saw. And the reason why is because I don't know who did it. I don't know where they got it from. But my parents had like those bootleg VHS tapes where they recorded it off TV. So my first experience, and I don't know, it didn't have commercials from what I remember. So I don't know if someone made it for them or what. But I watched A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back on these bootleg VHS tapes. And just that intro, like the beginning intro, not just the ship, but before that, just the Star Wars logo, the music, the credits, all that. I mean, that made a huge impact on me from the start, and it still gives me chills when I see it to this day.
Yeah, I would like to say that the original scroll in the Star Wars movies is still 10 times better than any of the new ones. Just the way the music sounds, the way it looks is just 10 times better than the newer stuff.
Hands down. It's not even close. That original, just everything hits. And even the new ones still hit. But the original, something about it is just perfect. And this movie is awesome, even to this day, even 1977. It's crazy how good this movie still looks and how much it holds up. We're going to get into all that. But as we like to do here on the Nerdcast, we're going to go through the background, the production side of things. How did this all come together? And I actually didn't know this story, and I read a lot of articles. I went on Wikipedia. I read a bunch of stuff to get ready for this, and I learned a lot. And Mark, maybe you might even learn some things too. Getting into it, Star Wars was George Lucas's third film after American Graffiti. He was inspired by the adventure serials of the past like Flash Gordon, and originally, I never knew this, he wanted to adapt Flash Gordon into films, but couldn't secure the rights, and that's what made him decide to write Star Wars for himself, make his own space fantasy series. And that was in the early 70s. After that, after he got inspired and started writing, he wrote the original synopsis, which was titled Journal of the Whills, and was about C.J. Thorpe, an apprentice of Jedi Bendu, who was trained by Mace Windu.
And that's interesting now that those names have been changed a little bit and became characters.
Right, Bendu, the beast from Rebels, and then obviously Mace Windu, Samuel L. Jackson. But yeah, so that was definitely an odd thing. See, I don't know where C.J. Thorpe comes from, but clearly that didn't stick. So after that original synopsis was written, Lucas was pitching this space fantasy film. He pitched it to Universal, Paramount, even Disney. They all rejected him because at the time, if you listen to our Alien podcast in 1979, we talked about how sci-fi was pretty much a dead genre at this time. Nobody wanted anything to do with it. Star Trek was already over with. Nobody cared. And nobody wanted to take a chance. Eventually, though, he was able to get the rights to do it with 20th Century Fox, who believed in Lucas's vision. And the smartest thing this man ever did, he may not be the best writer, but George Lucas is one of the smartest businessmen in history because he negotiated a deal to maintain all merchandising rights and sequel rights, and that is how he became one of the richest writers of all time.
Yeah, no, I don't know how he did that. I feel like Fox might have looked at it as like, okay, like, whatever, this movie might not be the best. Like, we'll get the box office money. You can have the merch money and it's one and done. Like, we'll make ours, you'll make yours. And then they basically got fucked as far as money goes.
Pretty much. And that is a lesson for any aspiring writers out there. I know I've learned the lesson. Always keep your royalties, folks. Always. Because you don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of companies don't believe in your product. They think it's going to flop, so they don't want to take the risk. You make sure you keep the rights. You could become a very rich person one day. Moving on. His first official draft came out in 1974. And this is where he had protagonist Anakin Starkiller. And that is Anakin with two N's, not one, two. Moff Tarkin was supposed to be a descendant of space dwarves. And Han Solo, everybody's favorite, was going to have green skin and scales. And basically, I think that's what inspired him to make Greedo.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like, I feel like it happens a lot where, like, if you get the original script to something, a character's name or the portrayal of a character is like, okay, this is going to be the main character. And then that character still ends up in the film, but then they end up like a Greedo where it's like a one-off character. You see him for like 10 minutes and then that's it. It's like, all right, I still used him, but like not as the main character like I had planned. I completely flipped that around, which he did for the better.
Yeah, I don't think Han Solo would be as popular as he is today if he was a green, scaly alien fish guy. Now, however, the one character that did stick was Chewbacca. He was always in the film. And he was based on George's dog, Indiana, which, if you know anything about George, went on to make Indiana Jones. So that's where that name came from. This is where we get into more of the interesting information, I think, because in 1975, his second draft was titled Adventures of the Star Killer Episode 1, The Star Wars, which is a horrible title. But anyways, it featured Luke Starkiller, so he finally changed it from Anakin to Luke. Luke also had several brothers, and his father, Anakin, was going to play a role in the original film. That was before Darth Vader, obviously. This was, though, where he came up with the Force, which is one of the most popular concepts, I think, in history. And he was actually going to explain who the first Jedi was and who the first was that turned to the dark side to create the Sith.
That would have been an interesting story to see who the first was to kind of flip. Because, like, we don't really know. It just kind of, they're there. The Sith are basically just people that are against the Jedi and see they're wrong and see the other side of the Force that is useful, which the Jedi frowned upon because it's not their way. And then with him having his father be Anakin and have some kind of portrayal in the end of the story. I mean, if he went that route, like Star Wars could have been completely different. Like it could have ended up not being what it is today, or just different characters in different places amongst the timeline.
Eventually we get the third draft here, which again, if you thought the title was bad, here's another bad one. The Star Wars from the Adventures of Luke Starkiller. I don't know if he really was trying to lean into that Flash Gordon style with these, but that just was not going to work. But anyways, his third draft pretty much was the same as what the final film is now. The only difference was that Obi-Wan was Luke's caretaker. Moving on to 1976, the fourth and final draft, which became the Star Wars that we know, had the absolute worst title of all of them. Now, I might need to take a breath between this one. The Adventures of Luke Starkiller as taken from the Journal of the Whills, Saga 1, The Star Wars. But after much deliberation from his peers, he shortened it to The Star Wars and then eventually just Star Wars, which was probably the smartest choice.
Yeah, I think if you would have released that movie with that title, no one would have went to see it at all. Like that is just too much. That is too much.
I don't know what this man was thinking.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's been said many times. He has a great mind, but it's just not all there.
I think George Lucas is another one, as I talked about in the DC podcast, our James Gunn podcast. He's an idea man, but he might not be the best writer of the bunch. So outside of that, everybody, Lucas, producers, writers, actors, every single one of them thought this movie was going to flop. Literally nobody thought Star Wars was going to be anything. Even Lucas himself, he really didn't think so, even after filming it. It released 1977 and became the highest grossing film of all time at that point in time, obviously, and spawned a multi-billion-dollar franchise that we know today. And at that time, Star Wars surpassed Jaws. And at that was a big deal back then because no one ever thought that could ever happen. And yet here we are. Star Wars came out, this supposed failure of a film, and it became probably the most iconic film in history. So now that we're past the background, let's kind of talk about the point in the timeline that we're at. And this is just overall in the sense of Star Wars, just so everybody knows. If someone hasn't seen this film, which it would be crazy if you haven't, but I know there's people that haven't. So what's going on right now is the Clone Wars have ended and the Empire, led by Emperor Darth Sidious and his fallen Jedi apprentice Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader, have taken control of the Senate and over the last 20 years have become the tyrannical power of the galaxy. Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi has gone into hiding on Tatooine and has hidden Vader's children, Leia with Senator Organa of Alderaan, and Luke on a moisture farm on Tatooine, the same farm Anakin's mother married into. One thing I wanted to ask you about this, Marc, since we're here, is does it really make sense for Obi-Wan and Luke to be hiding on Tatooine?
Do you mean like together?
Not together, but like, I get the fact that Darth Vader isn't going to go back to Tatooine because of the pain that he endured there and felt, and he's not going to go back, especially probably being ashamed of himself for what has happened. But, you know, even though I love the movies, I've always kind of found it hard to believe that, like, the Emperor wouldn't have investigated Anakin's family all those years later, especially knowing Obi-Wan and those kids are missing. And then on top of it, Obi-Wan's hiding as Ben Kenobi. Like, bro, change your name.
Yeah, your name is still very close to Obi-Wan. Like, all it takes is one person to be like, hey, I was alive during the Clone Wars, and you're very similar looking, and you have the same name. But as far as, yeah, I guess that is kind of like a flaw. But at the same time, like, I don't think the sequels and the prequels all existed in George's mind yet.
Not completely, anyways.
Yeah. So I think it's one of those things that, like, you know, kind of just chalk it up to, like, yeah, he's not going to go back to his home planet. And Palpatine was like, yeah, whatever. Your kids are dead. They all died anyways. I don't care.
I just always found that hilarious. Just, you know, Ben Kenobi's living on Tatooine, and just no one ever looks back at the Tatooine. Tatooine's just, fuck them. No one ever looks at it again.
Well, as they say, it's the home of scum and villainy. So, you know, I guess they don't really care. But at the same time, the Empire is in charge of everything. And one of the biggest counterparts to that would be crime and the Hutts and all that. So I guess it would make sense that at some point you would want to investigate that and maybe get rid of them. So I don't know. I guess it's just a flaw point with the fact that he didn't know the prequels were going to exist.
I guess it's just Sidious just being too happy with what ended up happening. He never looked back at it. Though, didn't they address in the Obi-Wan show, like, someone realized his last name was Kenobi?
No, I think someone did notice, but I don't think they, like, put two and two together. I think they just thought the name sounded familiar, but didn't really correlate it to him. You know, and then he disappeared again. So it's like, you know, there's really no proof that the person ever even saw him.
So, moving on, Leia, now a princess of Alderaan, has aided the rebellion against the Empire and has obtained information on how to destroy the Empire's home base, the Death Star. And that leads us right into the story with that classic intro crawl that we talked about. Now, another thing I want to talk about is John Williams' score. Is it, like, not hands down the best score of all time?
In my mind, it is, as far as a movie and, like, the way he did it in scenes and how it portrays what's happening and portrays the emotion. But I could see other people saying, like, there is better scores out there. But I feel like we've gotten away from that with current movies now. Like, they all just use songs that are out there. Like, no one actually has, like, original music as much anymore.
No one has an iconic score, and that was even one of my criticisms of The Acolyte, was that it didn't have any notable music except for, like, one track in the finale. Like, for Star Wars, like, even The Mandalorian has a pretty solid soundtrack, like, iconic at this point. So this is where it all started. And I think, even if you don't want to say this is the greatest original soundtrack of all time, I would hands down say it's the most iconic. So, getting into the film, the Empire's Imperial Star Destroyer tracks and boards Princess Leia's ship, with stormtroopers being led by Darth Vader to investigate. Now, if you can remember back this far, aesthetically, how did you feel about, like, the way the movie looks? Like, the sets, the characters, like Darth Vader, the stormtroopers. Like, I remember even just seeing that for the first time, that hit me right away. Like, I absolutely loved everything I was seeing. And even now, I still do. I still think they're all amazingly designed characters.
Yeah, I think as a kid, when I first saw it, like I said earlier, I was like, who the fuck is this guy? All black, red, shiny, glowing sword thing. You know, and then there's these white stormtroopers that are his, like, henchmen.
The breathing, too.
Yeah, his breathing. Like, I thought it was very, like, scary. And then, you know, obviously you learn Star Wars is not a horror movie. But as a kid, like, I can see kids watching that for the first time and be like, I don't like it. But as far as, like, the set goes, for the budget they had and the time period we were in, it still holds up. Like, it immediately throws you in, and, like, you can tell, like, all right, I'm not on Earth anymore. Like, I'm somewhere else. I'm in a completely different world.
Like, I know the movies have been touched up a bit to look better, but those sets are still, like, they're so good. It's insane how good those sets look, even compared to stuff you see today. So this is the point where Princess Leia gives the droid R2-D2 the plans to destroy the Death Star and a message to get Obi-Wan Kenobi on Tatooine.
Also, I'd like to point out that at this point in the movie, with the few beeps we got from R2-D2, my dogs, anytime he made a noise, were on high alert. Like, they were sitting there staring at the TV like, what is this? What is that? What is happening? And then also I'd like to point out that early R2-D2 walked more than he rolled. I don't think that's something you're really supposed to pay attention to, because it's a man in a suit. It's like you can't really make him roll, so it's kind of hard to portray that. But that is something I noticed.
I always loved how sassy R2 was. Like, you can tell he's sassy, even just the beeps. And, like, just the dynamic between him and C-3PO being, like, this old married couple.
Yeah, they are an old married couple. Because, like, throughout the whole thing, he's like, all right, I'm leaving you. Like, I'm done with you. But then as soon as he's gone, he's like, all right, I miss him. I need him. Where's he at? Also, the whole theory that, like, Star Wars is told from the perspective of R2 and C-3PO, I can see that. But I feel like if you just watched A New Hope, I could see how you would think that. But yeah, no, that's completely not true.
No, because you see scenes where they're not even around. So that can't possibly be true. But I guess it's interesting either way. Anyways, the Stormtroopers capture Leia. Vader calls her a traitor to the Senate, interrogates her about the plans. She won't tell where they've gone. R2 and C-3PO unwillingly, they get into the escape pod. They shoot down to Tatooine.
Before they escape, I'd like to point out that is the only time we see accurate stormtroopers.
Stormtroopers have notoriously bad shots if you ever pay attention. But you're right, that one. But it's because he had a different gun. Maybe that's why. Maybe the blasters aren't very good. Because if you see when he shoots Leia, it's like that blue pulse.
Well, that's because he switched to
the stun.
No, I meant in the first scene where they come in, like there's like a 2-second window where they actually do kill a couple people, and then that is their true. Accuracy goes down the drain. And then I did have a question that I don't have the answer to, and I don't understand. Why did Darth Vader physically choke him instead of force choke him?
That's funny you bring that up, because I thought that too. I was like, maybe he didn't think about using the force at that time. I don't know. Maybe he just wanted to be more menacing. Maybe he wanted to physically intimidate these guys. But I did think that too. That's funny that you bring that up.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things like, George didn't fully know where the story was going to go and what was going to become.
I think they also just didn't want to reveal the Force yet, because there's that scene where it happens, and I think he probably wanted to keep it that way.
Right.
But yeah, canonically, it makes no sense. So anyways, Darth Vader tells his troops, hey, go after that escape pod. I think that's where the princess hid the plans. As you already brought up, when R2 and C-3PO get to Tatooine, they split up because C-3PO is like, fuck this shit.
Going back to the score, the music that he did for them first landing and walking around, portraying them being lost, was like the perfect sounds and instruments you could use for that. Like, anytime I hear that sound in Star Wars, like I automatically think, know that, okay, this scene, they're lost. They don't know where they're going.
This movie has amazing, it just sounds in general. I think it might be the best film of sound or usage of sounds, like just the beeps between R2 and just, I don't know. All the sounds are so iconic to this day. You can immediately recognize it as Star Wars. So anyways, like I was saying, R2 and C-3PO, they split up. And of course, the Jawas, a race of scavengers, kidnap the droids and immediately bring them back together. I always loved the Jawa design. And I always loved the idea of them being the scavengers that just steal shit. Like, I love the scene in The Mandalorian where they take his whole ship.
Yeah, no, their design is great. The only thing I have a complaint with the Jawas and the Sand People, which we'll get to later, is they're all dressed as if it's colder. Like you're on a desert planet. But I get it. It's to protect themselves from the sun. But no, them stealing everything. If you don't catch them knowing that they stole it, it's already on to the next person. But the scene where they did capture R2, what did you think about the electricity that went around him as far as effects and if it holds up to now?
I mean, you can tell it's a little old, but I never really saw too much of a problem with it.
Around this time when he did his CGI adding, and we've seen what he could do with electricity with the Force, I'm surprised that isn't something he went and changed.
That's a very good point, because we're going to get into the fact that he changed a lot of needless shit. But you'd think that, of all things, he would change.
Yeah, I agree. Like, there's so many things he added that were just not necessary, but that's something that, like, you could have changed that effect and it would have worked perfectly.
Speaking of needless things to change, that's literally the next scene with the stormtroopers finding traces of the droids at the escape pod and the dewbacks.
Fucking awful. The puppet dewbacks were so much better. Like, I don't know why you changed to that. Like, I get it, you know, technology advanced, you wanted to be up to date with the times, but that was just something that you took away your practical effects that were amazing in that scene. And, like, just watching the Stormtrooper climb off of it. Like, the Stormtrooper was even CGI. Like, that was terrible.
I'm personally not a big fan of, like, messing with what you've already made, because you just end up muddling it like George Lucas did. So, yeah, a lot of needless changes, and we'll get into many more as we go through the story. But basically, this is the point where the Jawas sell the droids to Uncle Owen. And this is where we meet Luke Skywalker, the only Skywalker we knew back then.
And when they go to buy them, they originally don't want R2. What?
Yeah, they get that piece of shit droid.
They get R4. But, like, I want to know what made him malfunction. Like, in my mind, like, rewatching it with what I know now of Star Wars, like, I thought maybe the Force made it malfunction. Because it was like, nope, he needs R2 and C-3PO.
That is an interesting idea. That never even occurred to me. I just figured he was a piece of shit. At this point in time, we meet Luke Skywalker, and Uncle Owen tells him to clean the droid. So Luke goes, he's cleaning, and this is where he finds, this is really the start of our adventure. This is where he finds the message to Obi-Wan and R2, and he sees Princess Leia, and, you know, obviously attractive female. He's interested right away, especially being secluded to this farm. And this is where he hears Obi-Wan Kenobi, "You're my only hope." And he thinks, oh, old Ben. I wonder if that's old Ben Kenobi. Yeah, motherfucker, it probably is. Surprised the Empire didn't think of that one. But
I don't know. Going back to what you had first asked me, like, I don't know how they didn't put two and two together, especially after seeing the Vader and Obi-Wan show. Like, you know he's still alive. Why did you not go and try to search for him again? Also, I'd like to point out, I don't know what any of this means, but I looked up how they made the hologram because I was curious how they were able to do that back then. So I guess they use a laser and a particle of cellulose or cellucose. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. And plant fiber. And then they move the plant fiber, which portrays Leia, to make the hologram. I thought that was interesting because obviously there's no technology for holograms back then. And I guess there is now, but I just thought that was interesting. I don't know what any of those words mean, though.
It's crazy, like, hearing about the way they used to have to do things before CGI and how it, like, really took off. It's incredible. That was awesome. I'm glad I never saw anything like that, so I'm glad that you found that, and now I know. Plant fibers. So at this point in the story, Luke, you know, he asks his uncle and aunt about Obi-Wan, and his uncle right away, this is actually one of my favorite scenes in the movie because it ties into the overall, all 6 films so well, because he asks him about Obi-Wan and his uncle tells him, your father knew him, you know, just forget it. And then when Luke says, I want to go to the pilot academy, Uncle Owen's like, no, you can't go. I need you here on the farm. And when he walks away, when Luke walks off all pissed off about that, Aunt Beru says Luke is like his father, and Uncle Owen says that's what worries me. And so it's kind of cool how they already were planting the seeds of that in the first film.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I had a note for that too. That specific, like, quote, like, now seeing what we've seen, like, that quote is so much more meaningful now than when you would first watch that movie. You're like, oh, his father must have been a really bad dude. Like, what did he do? But now knowing what we know, like, that hits so much harder. Knowing what Luke, the path Luke took and what he became, he was a lot like his father as far as, like, a pilot and, like, the risks that he would take. And he's like, all right, I'm just going to do this. If it works, whatever. Like, he's very much like his father.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool. I mean, Lucas obviously had an outline of the entire history of Star Wars, just like a basic outline, I'm sure. But yeah, that right. I mean, that scene hits more now than it ever could have in 77. Nobody had any idea about Anakin at that time. And now it's crazy to have that kind of foresight when you're writing something. So this gets me into a deleted scene that I think is pretty important. And I'm kind of surprised it was a deleted scene. It must have only been deleted for runtime's sake. But this is a point where Luke, because he got turned down to be this, to go to the pilot academy, his uncle told him he can't go. He goes to see like his friends, I guess you could call them. And this is where he sees Biggs. His Biggs is supposed to be his best friend, but we never see Biggs in the original film. And at least I don't think we do. There is a scene added later in the modern version where you see him during the X-Wing fight, but we'll get into that later. For now, Luke goes and sees his friend Biggs, and Biggs tells him, hey, listen, I'm basically going to leave the academy and I'm going to go join the rebellion and fight in the rebellion. And he tries to convince Luke, like, listen, you shouldn't let your uncle hold you back. You need to go do this. And I think that's an important scene because that ties directly into what happens right after. It's really cool, and I'm surprised that really got cut out because it adds more layers to Luke's character.
Yeah, I agree. It would have added more to him running off to go find, well, we haven't got there, but to go get the droids after they run off, and then being like, okay, now I'm really curious, and now I'm just kind of going to do my own thing. Like, it would have added more to that of him being like, all right, maybe my uncle is holding me back and I need to go make my own choices. And instead you get the scene where he just kind of does it and it slowly evolves. It would have made it more meaningful if you had that little 2-minute scene, if that they cut out.
It was maybe like a 4 or 5 minute scene. So I kind of get it. But either way, I think they should have left it in. I think he should have tried to fight for that because it adds depth to Luke's character. And I don't know. It's just one of those things that when I saw it, I was really surprised that got cut out of all things. Obviously, this is the point where we get to one of the most iconic scenes in the film when Luke stares at the two suns on Tatooine, which is awesome. That will always be an awesome scene. So R2, being the pesky little confident droid that he is, he takes off on his own. He says, fuck this shit. I need to go find Obi-Wan. And Luke and 3PO are like, well, we better go look for him in the morning. This is another deleted scene, actually. This one, I kind of understand why they deleted it because it wasn't that good. But there's a scene, there's supposed to be a scene where Luke and C-3PO are in the land speeder, like just talking about what's going on. And that one, like I said, it's not much of a surprise. It got deleted because it just doesn't really add anything to the film. So Luke goes and investigates. And this is where we run into the Sand People. Now, what did you have to say about the Sand People, Marc?
I think their design is great, but same thing with the Jawas. Like, I get it. It's to protect them from the sun, and then me learning the Book of Boba Fett more about how they dress. But I don't know, watching it for the first time, not knowing anything, I'd be like, why so many layers? Like, you're in the sun, aren't you going to melt? But it's, they're used to being that. It's actually to preserve themselves from getting too hot. And I'm glad he didn't edit any of them and give them a CGI bantha. But also, I have another question that confused me. Why did C-3PO faint?
I guess he's just a dramatic ass droid. What can we say? He was wired that way, I guess. So this is a point where Luke gets confronted by the Sand People. They're about to take him out. And then all of a sudden we hear this weird noise. And I was surprised to learn that the noise is different in all three versions of this movie. The 77 version, the 2004 version, and now the more recent, like, special edition 2011 Disney Plus version, which I think Disney Plus maybe even changed the noise too, because they made some edits too, I guess. So there's really 4 versions of this movie. But I don't know why they changed the noise. The original one sounds more threatening to the Sand People than any of the other ones. What do you think of the noise? And how the hell did Obi-Wan make that noise?
So actually, I did not know that it was changed more than once. But yeah, I don't know how he made the noise. I feel it's just like a very guttural like type yell that he makes. But he does then say like they're easily frightened, but they'll come back with numbers. So I feel like any noise that if they weren't paying attention to would have scared them. So I don't know why they picked that specific noise or how he did it.
Now, this was a part that I've seen this movie many times. I probably can't even tell you how many times. But I never noticed this scene. When Obi-Wan is talking to Luke, he literally says, he's not dead, at least not yet. I never caught that, ever. Anytime I watched the film, like literally teasing what's going to happen later.
I think that's one of those things I caught, but never really put the foreshadowing aspect into it. I like that scene because, once again, I think it's one of those things that wasn't written that way. But, you know, as he's talking to Luke and he calls R2 over, he acts as if he doesn't know who R2-D2 is or C-3PO, which is a damn fucking lie. But you can almost see, like, or portray on his face when he sees R2, like, oh shit, here we fucking go again. Like, I thought I was done with this shit, and now these two motherfuckers show up again.
Yeah, I always thought that was funny, too, where he's like, I never owned a droid, but technically he never did own them, so he's not lying.
No, yeah, he's not lying about that. He didn't own them, but, you know, you definitely know who the fuck they are.
Clearly. He traveled with them so many times. This is the scene, another one of the best scenes, and this was, again, incredible foresight. And it's amazing that Lucas even put this in the original film, where Obi-Wan, you know, brings him back to his house and tells Luke about his time fighting alongside his father in the Clone Wars. I always thought that was fascinating that the Clone Wars were talked about all the way in 1977. Like, Lucas had that written out already, and even tells the story of, you know, he doesn't outright say that Anakin, you know, he actually lies to Luke and says that Anakin was his friend and, you know, Vader was his apprentice, which is true. But I always thought that was cool how Lucas had all of that written out already in 77.
Well, and there's more that alludes to the Clone Wars throughout the movie. I know we're going to get to it, but I'll bring it up real quick. When they go to the bar and he says, we don't serve your kind, he's referring to the droids. It's because, you know, what had happened during the Clone Wars, like no one trusts droids, and at this point in time, they still don't.
Yeah, that's true. That's something I've actually never even thought of before. That's an awesome little detail there, too. Like I said, this was an amazing scene, and this is also where Obi-Wan gives him the lightsaber. The only thing I had to say about this is there is a difference in this, believe it or not. And it has to do with Obi-Wan's house. In 1977, Obi-Wan had a little hut that blends in with everything else in Tatooine. Makes perfect sense if you're hiding. In the 2011 special edition versions, Obi-Wan's got a fucking sand mansion. This man calls himself Ben Kenobi and then lives in a mansion on Tatooine? Like, I don't think this man was hiding. I think he was waiting for somebody to come.
I think he got too comfortable. Or at this point in time, the scene from Rebels where he fights Darth Maul has already happened. So maybe he thought, that's really my only threat. Vader's never going to come find me. I can kind of do whatever I want now, just kind of stay in hiding. And then obviously with the Obi-Wan show, the mansion is kind of what they chose to go with.
And I mean, what was Obi-Wan working at? Some like meat packing factory? They must have been paying good as fuck.
Yeah, or maybe he stole a couple credits from the temple before he
while
left.
Everybody was dying, maybe him and Yoda took off with some credits.
Yeah, he's like, I'm going here, you go there. Here's enough to survive for 600 years.
We'll split the Jedi treasury.
Yeah.
So, moving on. R2 plays the full transmission, and this is where we see the rest of it, where she basically says, I have the plans to destroy the Death Star. I put them in this droid. And Obi-Wan, I need you to find my father on Alderaan. So this is where Obi-Wan, after all these years of hiding, has to come out, because this is his time to strike. and they can do a critical blow to the Empire by destroying their Death Star. This is where Obi-Wan tells Luke, like, listen, you need to become a Jedi. There's no more fucking around here. You're not a farmer. You are a Jedi, and you need to help me. Luke, of course, I got a farm. So he's not going, not yet at least. We then go to one of the most interesting scenes in the film. And when this is the one we were kind of talking about earlier, Tarkin and Vader. How do you like their relationship? Because I always thought it was fascinating that Vader actually respects this guy. Like, he actually listens to him.
Looking at it, it's almost as if, like, Vader answers to him throughout the movie, which obviously isn't the case. But it's one of those things, knowing what we know now with the Clone Wars, there was a couple episodes where Tarkin was with them, and no one liked Tarkin, but Anakin at the time, kind of stuck with him and agreed with him. So it kind of portrays that relationship where it's like, I trust you. I've been along for the ride with you. But also, I think it's one of those things, Tarkin doesn't know Vader's Anakin, but Anakin knows Tarkin.
He doesn't know that it's Anakin, really?
I don't think so. I don't think anybody does, really.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Most people just think he was just the Emperor's apprentice that just appeared.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I remember those Clone Wars episodes. I just thought that was cool. I liked how they expanded on that. Like, that's one of the things that Lucas did well with the Clone Wars, was expanding on things of that nature. Now, this is also the first scene where Darth Vader uses the Force to choke somebody, because this dude's getting out of line talking shit. However, I always felt this was kind of weird, and I figured this was a good place to talk about it. In the way, and I know that obviously Lucas didn't know the entire timeline at this time, but in this film, they talk about the Force as an ancient religion. Is 19 years really ancient?
What do you mean by 19 years?
It's been 19 years between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. But like in the original films, they talk about the Force like it is this ancient religion. But like it's only been 19 years. Like it hasn't really even been a generation exactly that the Jedi have been gone.
Yeah, I think it's more so he's referring to the fact that like it's been around for so long and it hasn't done much besides what happened during the Clone Wars and what happened after. Because before that, obviously, it's, you know, the Acolyte and stuff like that. Like, it never really had a focal point amongst the galaxy as far as ruling the galaxy. So I think in his mind, he thinks that, you know, weapons are the way to rule the galaxy and control people. And Vader's like, no, I've seen what the Force can do. Like, shut the fuck up, basically.
Right, but I always just find it hilarious that, like, in the original trilogy, everybody, even Han, talk about the Force like it's this whack job thing, when literally like 20 years ago, motherfuckers were flying around fucking people up in droids.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like for Han's sake, the age difference, like he's probably only like 20, so he's only heard stories. He's never actually seen anything.
It's true, but it's just, I don't know. It's like they act like this happened like 200 years ago. Now, obviously, like I said, that's because Lucas didn't have that written out that far. He didn't know. But I always felt like the prequels maybe should have been pushed a little bit further back in time. Moving on, Obi-Wan and Luke find the Jawas dead from Imperials, who make it look like the Sand People attacked, but obviously Obi-Wan knows this damage is too sophisticated to be Sand People. Has to be Imperials making it look like that. This is when Luke realizes, oh shit, the Empire tracked the droids. My aunt and uncle are fucked. And they sure are, because isn't this like one of the darkest scenes in any of Star Wars? Like, you literally see Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru's bodies burning. They're skeletons.
Yeah, no, it's a brutal scene, but also Luke is so unfazed.
I was going to bring that up for sure. He gets over it pretty damn quickly.
He's just like, all right, adventure time.
I watched this movie with my dad over the weekend, and I literally joked. At least I guess he was happy he didn't have to do another season at the farm.
He's like, no more farming. I get to start my adventure. Thank you, Imperials.
He's more upset about Obi-Wan dying later than anybody else. It's like you've only known Obi-Wan for like an hour, bro.
Yeah, as far as time's sake, like an hour, maybe 6 hours tops, and you're more concerned that some, I don't even know what you'd call him. I mean, obviously he's a Jedi, but like in your mind, some recluse wizard dude you had more feelings towards than your family.
Than your literal family that raised you. So things move pretty quickly. This is the point where obviously Luke joins Obi-Wan and they head off to Mos Eisley so he can become a Jedi. And Kenobi, this is where he uses his mind tricks on the Stormtroopers, which is a classic scene. However, this scene gets ruined in the modern versions because of all this god-awful CGI that he added.
Why did we need CGI womp rats? Like, I get it. They're all over Tatooine. Like, you could have just left them out. Just had them be this thing they talk about. And then, there's that scene where the Jawa falls off the creature, which used to be a practical effect scene. And now it just does not fit. It looks awful.
Those scenes stick out like a sore thumb. It's insane. Like, you can literally tell this was not in the original movie. Even someone who hasn't seen the original movie could probably tell this feels out of place. And the thing that I hated was all of the ships in the background flying in and out too. Like, that's so unnecessary. I don't know. I don't like it at all. One thing I found cool though, because I watched a documentary about how Lucas filmed this movie. And I thought it was cool that he actually films all of the Tatooine scenes in the Tunisian desert. And something that was crazy was that the sandstorm actually destroyed their set. And they had to like rebuild the whole thing again. That had to suck. But I always thought that was cool that he actually filmed it like in a legit desert. It wasn't just a set or anything. And that's the beauty of those practical effects. You can't get it better than actually being on location.
That's the beauty of original Star Wars. The Star Wars that came from George Lucas is like, his practical effects and him going to locations to get those scenes and those shots. And then now you can kind of just do it with CGI that looks good and fits in now because technology's advanced. But it just adds to the atmosphere, and that's lost in a lot of movies now.
We talked about in our Alien Nerdcast how modern movies rely too much on CGI. And practical is just always the way to go. And this film proves it because it still looks good to this day, minus all the CGI bullshit. So this is the part where Luke and Obi-Wan go into the cantina. And like you said, they say the droids aren't allowed because of what happened in the past. That adds up with the canon. And Luke and Obi-Wan are looking for a pilot to take them to Alderaan. And this is one of the most iconic scenes in all of cinema when the guy bothers Luke. I mean, so many things have like paid homage to that scene or made fun of it in other things. I always thought it was crazy how gruesome this scene was for Star Wars because you literally see this dude's arm get chopped off and there's blood splattered, which is something you don't see often.
I don't understand why there was blood. I think they've gone back and retconned it that like his species is the reason why there was blood. That scene is great because it's two outlandish looking characters. One's butt chin and then the other one's kind of just deformed.
I also got to give a shout out to the greatest band of all time.
Yes, that is hands down, minus the intro to Star Wars, the best song to come out of Star Wars. And it will definitely 1000% be played at my wedding with Jenny. Whether she likes it or not, it is going on the song list.
I look forward to that.
Like I'm doing the original, and then I found this like remix version. Both of those are going on the playlist.
Don't they have like a CD of songs or something that someone released?
I think they have like a full song list. Like they have a Christmas one too.
Yeah, they do have a Christmas one. That's hilarious. Another thing, unfortunately, this scene also gets ruined by some shitty CGI. I like the Wolfman.
I agree. Like I remember getting the toy of that, like from the 90s. So it was before I was even born. And it has like the little film slot of him.
They had a Wolfman toy?
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
But like, you didn't know who the character was. It was just like, there's a space wolf. It was fucking awesome. I actually didn't even catch that they took him out of the scene.
Yeah, they replaced him with some CGI alien shit. So this is the part where they meet Han Solo, pretty much everybody's favorite character in Star Wars. And they negotiate a deal with him for Han and Chewie to take them in the Millennium Falcon to Alderaan. And can I just say, I'm sure everybody agrees with this, but like the Millennium Falcon is the coolest ship in sci-fi.
I agree, but I think it's fun in Star Wars when everyone sees it and they shit on it. So this hunk of junk is the one that is going to get us from point A to point B, and it's the one that did the Kessel Run in 7 parsecs or whatever.
It has a charm to it. An old clunky charm. Now, this is probably the most talked about scene in all of Star Wars. Who shot first?
Han shot first. I don't care how many times you change the movie. Han shot first.
Is this one of the most egregious changes ever? The scene where Han moves his head is awful in every version, and it makes no fucking sense that he can dodge a blaster bullet.
Like,
it's even led to debates on if Han is force sensitive.
Yeah, no, it's just a terrible choice of using CGI to change a scene. He is not force sensitive. It's one of those things that was just unnecessary. And like, you could chalk it up to like, oh, Han knew that he was going to die on the spot because Greedo wanted the money, so he shot him first. But no, he shot first. Plain as that. There was no reason to change that scene.
And it's like, Lucas changed it because he was like, well, I want Han to be a hero. But like, Han isn't a hero. That's the whole point. He's finding him in this fucking bar of lowlives. It adds so much to his character that he's just an outlaw. And he would shoot first because he knows this guy's coming for him anyways. So I don't know. I don't understand why he changed that. That's just one of the dumbest things ever. We're not going to spend too much time on it, though, because literally everybody's talked about that. Everybody knows it. We then go back to the Death Star, where the Empire is torturing Leia. She won't give up the rebellion base. So this is another iconic scene where Tarkin demonstrates the power of the Death Star and blows up her homeworld of Alderaan. Even after the place blowing up, which again, this must run in the family because Leia doesn't seem to be all that upset that her family's gone either. She moves on pretty quick.
Maybe it's like they know that that's not actually their family. So
like
right,
low
whatever.
key, they know.
Start over, redo.
But I never noticed this either. Probably because I hadn't played the game before the last time I seen this movie. But Leia lies to Tarkin and tells him the rebel base is on Tatooine. Now, if you've played Knights of the Old Republic, you actually find out that Tatooine is where a Jedi temple is. It's actually one of the main locations in that game. So it's cool that they took that name from the original film and actually expanded on it in a video game. So now this is where we get to, I think, I actually hate this more than Han shooting first. The Jabba the Hutt scene.
It is disgusting. It just looks so out of place and such bad CGI, but it's what they had at the time, and I get what he was trying to do. You should have just left it alone.
He mastered it in 2011.
No.
Yeah, so there's two versions of Jabba. There's a 2004 version that looks like shit, and then there's you probably watched the 2004 version, didn't you?
I don't know. I watched whatever one I clicked on Disney Plus.
Oh, okay. Well, then never mind. The Disney Plus one's the 2011 version where he redid it, and it still looks like shit.
It still looks awful.
Go back and watch the DVD version from 2004. It's 10 times worse.
It's just bad in general. But you got to see Boba Fett, so I guess that's kind of cool.
It's about the only good part of it. I will say this, too. It doesn't make any fucking sense because they filmed this scene in the original 77. And Jabba, though, is a human in that version, which is what leads to the awkward CGI because they literally just put a CGI bubble of what Jabba became over this human actor. But the actor, I watched the original scene because somebody on YouTube put up one where it's like stitched together where you can watch it. And in the original scene, and even in the new scene, Han literally says, "You're a lovely human being, Jabba." Even in the new one, he says that. Jabba's not a fucking human. He was in the original, but he's not in the... Why did Lucas feel the need to do this? Is it just like redemption for him because he couldn't put it in the original?
Probably redemption, but you could change Han tilting his head, but you couldn't cut out the phrase human. You could have just said you're a wonderful and left it at that, or just cut out that whole phrase. A wonderful
being.
Yeah.
I don't know. I hate that more than Who Shot First. That scene just looks awful, looks terrible, makes no sense. I hate it. So, Mark, before we get too far, I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about Han and Chewie's dynamic, like their characters and their designs? How did you always feel about them as like a duo?
I like them as a duo. You know, obviously you don't know what Chewie's saying, but you can tell by his like demeanor and the way he moves and then the way he like sounds.
Do your Chewie impression.
Put me on the spot.
Oh, that was a bad one. Come on. You used to do it in school all the time. You could do better than that.
That's where it's at now. It's as good as I can do now.
You've lost the touch. Anyways, back to what you were saying.
But no, the way he like tilts his head with certain things and the way he sounds higher or lower, like you can tell what he's portraying. And the fact that, you know, Han is the only one that they show that understands him at this point. And I feel like Chewie's more sympathetic than Han is. Because at this point, Han is straight up just a smuggler and doesn't give a fuck. He's like, I want my money. That's all I care about. I like that aspect. And then I do like how his character comes full circle and he kind of changes his ways. The only complaint I have is there's no way to put it in the film. It wouldn't have fit, wouldn't have made sense. It's just how they know each other, which obviously we got that in the Solo movie. But that was my only concern. Like as a kid, that was my only ever question is like, how do they meet? How do they know each other? Like, what is he? What is a Wookiee?
Yeah, it's kind of surprising that they never dove into that story in the original trilogy. You know, most stories would go into characters' relationships, but Star Wars never really did outside of like Obi-Wan and then Anakin, Luke, Leia, things like that. And they didn't even get into Luke and Leia until much later. Up until this point, they were doing some incest.
I was going to wait to bring that up a little bit later in the film.
Oh, we will. We will.
But yeah.
Obviously, Lucas at the time didn't know that, so I'm not gonna go at him as hard as I did about Anakin and Padme's awkward relationship. But anyways, this is a part where someone follows Luke and Obi-Wan, rats them out to the Imperials. They jump on the Falcon, they escape, the Imperials are shooting at them. This was something cool that I never knew, though, is the fact that someone actually, like the set of the Falcon, when they're sitting in the set, someone actually shakes. Like 2 people got on the ends and shook it. I always thought maybe it was kind of like a ride where they had like something to make it shake up and down. I didn't think 2 guys just grabbed the freaking thing and shook it to give it that effect. But another thing that I want to ask you about, I actually had a toy of this. And I've always found it fascinating. Chewie's chess game.
I can't remember what it's called. But there is actually like a game version of it that you can play. And it's like chess, but it's more so like a fighting game. So like you'd say, for example, you'd move your pawn. Well, your pawn is some creature that then in turn fights that creature and either wins or loses based off of mechanics and what you do. No, I liked it. I thought it was interesting because, like, you know, they're in a galaxy far, far away. They're not going to have chess and checkers and Uno. They're going to have their own different versions of games.
Yeah, I didn't actually have the board game. I just had a toy of like Chewie came with the little piece of like, them fighting on it.
Yeah, it was at a little board with like orange holographic figures on it. Yep.
I have that toy. I also have a Obi-Wan of like the one you were saying where it came with that little like picture pull down thing. Anyways, Tarkin discovers that Leia lied and that the Falcon, it ends up arriving at Alderaan to find it in pieces. And this is where they get stuck in the tractor beam of the Death Star. Now, this is one of my favorite scenes because I love where Vader senses Obi-Wan. That especially now, again, like that scene hits so much harder now than it ever could have back then.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those things like when you first see it and it first came out, you didn't really know what the Force was. You're like, what is he feeling? What is happening? But now knowing what we know, he's feeling a presence of his master and a presence that he has not felt in a long time because he's feeling someone in the Force as well for the first time in a long time too.
That is true. And I also love how they steal the Stormtrooper outfits. I always thought that was awesome. Luke and Han.
Oh yeah. And I like how they do it. Like you don't really see them do it, but it's, they fuck up the two guys that go in there and then they're kind of just like, hey, we need help. And then all of a sudden they walk back out and it's like, all right, we're Stormtroopers now. Like, let's go.
So this is the part where R2 finds the power to turn off the tractor beam to let their ship leave. Obi-Wan says, I'll go alone. And this is where he says for the very first time the famous words, may the Force be with you always. R2 also finds where the princess is locked up. And of course, Luke, being a bright-eyed little boy who likes pretty girls, we got to go save the princess. Solo's like, hell no. I ain't got time for that. But this is where Luke convinces him, hey, she's rich. And I love that aspect of Solo's character where he's like, oh, she's rich. Yeah, hell yeah, I'm helping you.
Yeah, that's the only thing. He's like, I don't care what she looks like. I don't care what happens. Like, she's got money.
And even though we've criticized some of the, maybe not so much the writing of this film, but like aspects that don't line up with what was written later, I think that this is like unreal character development because it shows Luke's heroic aspirations, but it also shows Han being like the scummy guy that he is at the time. It's little scenes like that, I think, go a long way. So this is the part where Han and Luke walk through the Death Star and they have Chewy prisoner to make it look like they arrested this Wookie. So they're just walking on through. Han tries to talk to the officers. And obviously that doesn't turn out. I love that scene, how awkward it is. And then Luke goes and saves Leia, but really Leia saves them. And that's like one of the things where it's like, I don't understand this idea that Star Wars was never progressive. Like Leia is the smartest one in the room.
Yeah, they were basically trapped and she's the only one that found a way out. She's like, all right, well, that leads somewhere that's not here.
She literally grabs the gun from, I can't remember if it's Han or Luke, but she grabs the gun and is like, fuck you guys, I got this, and shoots the vent, the garbage chute for them to jump through. Like, Star Wars has always had powerful and in charge and confident female characters. So why is it a problem now?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why it's viewed as a problem. I think it's just because of how things are now. There's more attention drawn on it than there was before. Because back then, like, you watch and you're like, oh shit, she saved the day. And then it turns out like she really didn't because now they're in a trash compactor. But she was the one that came up with the plan. And she continues to be the one that has plans.
I will say, I don't know about you, but that trash compactor scene, that shit was scary when I was a kid. That scene always disturbed me. And like them being all wet in that scummy water, like, I don't know, that scene even watching it to this day, it kind of freaks me out for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, it makes you uncomfortable because like there's something you can't see living there. Then, it tugs on claustrophobia because they're getting crushed.
So this is where like Luke basically, they're being crushed and Luke is like calling for C-3PO. And eventually, the droids get their shit together and R2 shuts down the garbage chute. I also liked how the Empire just left the droids alone, even though they look nothing like Empire droids. They're just like, yeah, it checks out. They're here.
Yeah, there's like, okay, protocol droid, not black. R2 unit, not black. Whatever, they're good.
This checks out.
And you were searching for them the whole time too. Right. I guess that is interesting. Vader had them searching for those droids, and then now they're on your ship, and you kind of just don't question when they appear in places.
And I just want to point out, we just did our Acolyte canceled fireside chat. This type of shit would have gotten destroyed in the modern day. Just putting that out there.
100%. They would have called it bad writing.
Star Wars would have been canceled if it came out today.
Yep.
Like, we're going about it just laughing at it. But, like, legitimately, people would have had, like, you know, just a fit over the writing in this movie. And, like, the fact that we talked about how Luke and Leia barely had any feelings for their parents, or what they would consider to be their parents, like, that stuff would have been annihilated on Twitter today. Yet here we are. Everybody still loves this movie. So basically, the last thing I have to say, shut the fuck up. This is actually my favorite scene in the entire movie. This is where Obi-Wan shuts down the power. And I wanted to, if you listen to our Alien 1979 podcast, Marc brought up the fact that in Star Wars, they used painted glass to make some of these scenes pop or add more to backgrounds that weren't really there. In the documentary I watched, that's actually what they did for this scene. To make it look more hollowed out, or like it like higher up than it really was, they used the painted glass. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up. And is that in the scene, I don't know how it works, but the way they paint and the way they angle the camera, it gives it that depth. And then, you know, for certain scenes, which we'll get to in other movies, it portrays that there's hundreds of people there when there's only 5 actual people there. But something with the way they paint and the way they put the colors on and the way the camera reflects, it just gives it that depth and that pop where it looks like he's, you know, one wrong move, he's fallen to his death.
There's such an art form to making these old films. It really saddens me how much CGI is just an entire film these days. But anyways, this is my favorite scene because this is where Obi-Wan and Vader fight. Even though, you know, if you watch the movies in the order they want you to, this is quite the downgrade from the Mustafar fight. Obi-Wan and Vader have aged a little bit. They ain't moving like they used to.
You could chalk it up to old age and, you know, probably haven't used their lightsabers or fought in a long time, because I didn't notice this before. We're watching it now. Like, there's a lot of scenes where Vader kind of just has a lightsaber in front of him. It's kind of just like scooting towards Obi-Wan. Like, he doesn't know how to swing the lightsaber.
For obvious reasons, it was because this was the first lightsaber battle and nobody had any fucking idea what it should look like. I always get a kick out of watching it, though, because like you watch episode 3 and they're fighting over pools of lava and doing all these fancy flips and all this stuff. And then over in this movie, they're just like barely moving the thing, doing a little spin move once in a while. Alec Guinness could move, man. I'll give him credit. He was moving better than Vader, like you said. But isn't it explained that Vader couldn't move because he's all burnt up and shit now and robotic?
Well, it's that, and he's all robotic. But like, even after the events of Revenge of the Sith, like, he was still like unstoppable. The real explanation is just like the weight of the suit and the way the suit was designed. Like, the actor couldn't do anything besides kind of just be there, you know. And the only other time we've seen Vader in live action is in Rogue One and then in the Obi-Wan show. And then in comics and like stuff like that, they portray that like he, you know, once he gets his mobility back, he is a force to be reckoned with. But we can chalk this one up to being the fact that he's way, way older now.
But this is my favorite scene because I love the fact that Obi-Wan, obviously he teased it earlier, like I said, a foreshadow. Obi-Wan went there to die and to inspire Luke to basically become a Jedi and continue his training. Like, he literally says, if you strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you can ever imagine, because Obi-Wan has already gone through the training and knows when he dies, he will become one with the Force. And he does, because when Vader slashes him, he disappears from existence. And I love how Vader's like kicking the robes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because I knew the quote was going to be brought up, but that's what I wanted to bring up too, is he's stepping on it. Like, where the fuck did he go? Because that was something Anakin never learned about the Force, was that aspect of it, and becoming a Force ghost and becoming one with the Force. So he had no idea what had happened. He's like, I just killed him, but now he's gone. Like, he probably was flabbergasted at the fact that that happened.
Yeah, and you couldn't see it under the mask. He was probably like, what the fuck? The unfortunate thing, though, even though I like the show, the unfortunate thing about the Obi-Wan Disney Plus show is it kind of ruins this scene almost, because Leia has no reaction to Obi-Wan dying. That's no fault of this movie's, but...
Yeah, but also it's, she knows him when he's, probably 50?
Yeah, but after the adventure they went on...
Yeah.
She should definitely care about Obi-Wan more than just, she just goes and comforts Luke over his death. Luke should not care as much as he does about
exactly. If anything, she should be the one that cares. He should be like, oh, I guess my wizard friend's gone. Cool.
Yeah, because she knew they literally traveled together and he saved her from the Empire.
That's no fault of this movie, and that's not a plot flaw either in them doing that in the show. I think it's just one of those things, like, you didn't really know where it was going to go.
It's one of those retcons they can't go back and, like, fix. Like, they can't go into the 77 film and make it where Leia's crying or something. I guess they could, but...
They could, but that's just not necessary.
They're not going to do that. But I always thought that was... After the Obi-Wan show, I thought that was funny.
No one batted an eye.
Yeah, no one's talking shit about that. Where were all you toxic ass Star Wars fans then? No, everyone loved it because Ewan McGregor was back and it was Obi-Wan. Though people did bitch about that show too, so I can't completely say they didn't, but either way, there was plot holes and other things too, and obviously the sequels, there's plenty of them. Moving on, I love that scene, and the next scene I love too, and I had a toy of this as well. Luke and Han on the turrets blowing up the TIE fighters. That shit's awesome. And I have a toy of Luke and Han, and they both go on the turrets.
Yeah, I didn't have that toy, but I know what you're talking about. And in that scene, I like how I never really noticed it before, but when Han goes up and Luke goes down, it's not like they're separate. Like, they can look up and see each other while they're doing it. That's something I never really noticed. And I think that's cool, like, imagery with their interaction, like when they're talking to each other and Luke's like, I got one, and he already shot one, and like they can actually see each other while they're doing it.
I just love the way those chairs moves too. I don't know, it's just a really cool scene.
I would probably throw up if I was in one of those chairs.
So this is the scene now after that. Leia knows the Empire are tracking them. That's why they let them get away, basically, so they can go find the Rebel base, because that's where they're gonna head. This is where we find out for sure Luke has a crush on his sister.
Disgusting, Luke. It's funny because when Han asked, like, so a girl like me, or a girl like her, and a guy like me, he just flat was like, no.
Then he finds out it's his sister. Kind of space redneck shit is this?
Space redneck shit.
Anyways, so they bring R2 back to Yavin 4. That's where the rebellion base is, and they bring the Death Star plans to the rebels. So now this next scene, this is where, they go through the Death Star plans. They get all the pilots together. They know what's going on. They know what they got to do. They got to shoot the little valve, like it's an air duct probably, and then it leads right to the center and blows the whole thing up. Very convenient design, but at least Rogue One explains how that design is so convenient. So Disney did do something right, explaining things further. This is a strange scene because this is where Biggs, Luke's best friend, returns. So this scene was not in 77, but they added this scene to 2011, from my understanding. But again, why would you add this scene in 2011 but not add in the one I talked about earlier that would explain who the hell Biggs is? Like in this, you just see him and Luke's like, hey, Biggs, how are you? It's so random in this version on Disney Plus.
Yeah, no, it would make sense to have that scene. And like, it's not like the movie is a brand new movie where like you don't want to add in scenes that are cut out. Like the movie's been out forever. Like you could have put that scene in there so at least we know who Biggs is. So otherwise all we know of him is Luke mentioning his friends and like what they did growing up in certain scenes. But like they just kind of gets introduced and like at the time, like when they released it in 2011, like you still don't really know who Biggs is.
So this is the scene where we see the X-Wings, the iconic, designs of the X-Wings flying towards the Death Star. How do you feel about the X-Wings, TIE fighters, all that? Aren't they like the coolest ships ever?
Oh yeah, I agree. I lean more towards the TIE fighters than I do the X-Wings. Even though the X-Wings have more to them than the TIE fighters. The TIE fighters literally just 2 walls and a little cockpit. The only complaint I do have about them, it's not a complaint about them in general, it's just a complaint about the movie, but I can't really knock it for the time frame, is when they blow up, they literally just evaporate. Like there's no floating parts, like there's no floating wings or anything. And then later on, and as we see in the Clone Wars and other movies, when there is a ship that's destroyed, like there's still remnants of the ship.
That is true. And why isn't that something he added in? But this scene clearly was inspired by World War II fighter pilot films, and it's just in space, which makes it even cooler. My only complaint about this scene, though, why'd they have to name the fat guy Porkins?
That was something I never even really caught until I got his figure.
Did they make a figure of everybody in Star Wars?
They used to, and now they fucking don't, and it's bullshit. But yeah, I remember getting his figure, and like it was minus Jabba. Like he was the only fat Star Wars figure at the time. And I was like, oh, his name's Porkins. And then I thought about it, and I was like, oh, that's clearly just making fun of fat people. And he's the first one to die.
And he's the first one to die. The Family Guy one goes into that. Another character I want to bring up that I hear so many people, old heads, talk about, and I don't get it. Wedge Antilles. Why do people like this guy, Mark?
I don't know. I don't know why he's so popular.
People talk about this guy like he's the Boba Fett of the Rebellion. And I'm like, I don't even remember seeing this guy.
It has to be something to do with his name, might be why they like him. Boba Fett had the outfit, which makes sense. And like, he's a bounty hunter. Like, cool. That makes sense to like him. And like, he didn't have any screen time really. But this guy's just a fucking pilot. Like the only pilot in this scene that really matters is Luke, Vader, and Solo and Chewbacca. Like everyone else is just side characters. I don't know why he got so popular.
I guess because he's the only other one that survived with Luke in the run of the Death Star. But still, it's like...
It's because he didn't do anything.
So anyways, at this point, Vader's in the TIE bomber. He's going after Luke. Han saves the day. Luke uses the Force to shoot and blows the entire Death Star up. We get this nice happy ending. The Rebels won. We get the award ceremony where Chewbacca doesn't get a medal because they're racist to Wookiees.
Yeah, what the fuck is that? Why the fuck did he not get a medal? I can understand not giving R2 or C-3PO a medal because they're not, I mean, that's going to sound bad, but they're not people. But then again, like they should have got one too. But most importantly, Chewbacca should have got one. Like I guarantee you Chewbacca's the one that told Han, like, hey, we should fucking go back. Like, yeah, making money is good, but like we could be part of the better good of the universe or the galaxy. And you don't give him a medal. He's just got to stand there awkwardly. And then especially as the movies go on and like the things he does to help, and you just don't even consider him worthy of a medal.
That was one thing Disney did right. At least they gave that man a medal. But other than that, that's the film. That's Star Wars. Mark, what is your overall feeling of A New Hope, and how do you think it stacks up against all the other Star Wars films?
I mean, if you can watch the original one without the added CGI, like, for example, if that's one you're going to watch, I still think the practical effects, the scenes, and the, like, location filming, and, like, the cool aspects that they added with, like, the glass and stuff like that to get certain scenes, it still holds up. And, like, those are things that still could be used in a movie now. And, yeah, we did point out some flaws and things that, don't make sense necessarily. But at the time, they didn't know where Star Wars was going to go and what was going to happen. But overall, I think it's still a good movie. And I think, if you're going to watch it in order, watching Rogue One and then going into A New Hope just works so well. And even in Rogue One, like, there's really not many effects in there that make you go like, oh, we're taking a huge step back.
No, Rogue One was very practical. Like, all the effects and everything in that movie, and just like the storyline was literally written right into A New Hope. So Rogue One, in that sense, is one of the better things Disney has done. And my thoughts overall on A New Hope, though, it might be my favorite Star Wars movie because I just like how the story flows. I just like how it starts. I don't know, just all the characters do something. The story's always moving. Luke from the farm to the Death Star to blowing it up. Like, a lot happens in this film. Even though it's slower paced than some of the other ones that would come later, there's a lot of great story moments. And I mean, overall, it is the most iconic Star Wars movie of all of them. So that's why I would maybe say it's my favorite, but we'll see. I mean, I'm going to rewatch all of them for this podcast, and we're going to go over every single one. So maybe my mind will change.
Yeah, that being said, like, you know, as a kid, my favorite was Return of the Jedi. And now I'm looking at these in a different perspective and watching them, and like, everyone loves Empire Strikes Back. And as a kid, that was my least favorite one. So it's going to be interesting to go in and watch that one and see where I stand on it as an adult and knowing what I know about Star Wars. And same with Return of the Jedi. Like, it might end up being that, like, all right, out of the original three, that's not really my favorite anymore.
Empire is overrated, just saying. I like it. It's still a good movie, okay? Don't lose your minds. Don't crucify me. I do think it's a little overhyped. And that'll be one of our next Nerdcasts, so you'll get to hear more about that. But overall, I love A New Hope. It'll always be one of my favorite Star Wars movies, maybe my favorite one of all time. And that's all I have left to say. Marc, do you have any final thoughts you want to share?
The only thing I'd like to add is if you're going to watch this movie and you haven't seen it before, don't look at it expecting to see a movie that you're going to see in 2024. And if you have watched it before and you've seen other Star Wars, don't look at it with the critique of like what you know now. Look at it for what it was and what it started and what has allowed you to get with Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, I made fun of things that, like, in canon don't make sense now because of what they've done in modern time, but that doesn't affect this film at all. This film is still, like, a masterful story on its own, except for Luke and Leia not caring about their parents or their foster parents.
Yeah, that's the only thing you really can't fix. Like, that is concerning.
But other than that, it's an amazing movie. And it's the movie that launched all these guys' careers, really. I mean, it's what made Harrison Ford, it made Mark Hamill, it made Carrie Fisher, and they all went on to be the icons that they are today.
Either know Harrison Ford hates everything Star Wars now.
Yeah, I feel like
I think he just does it to do it.
Yeah.
Because it's become a trend.
Because he does it too, like, even with the Red Hulk, he kind of, like, someone asked him a question, and he's like, I don't give a fuck.
He's like, I don't give a fuck. I'm getting paid.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? Gotta give George Lucas credit that Harrison Ford, Han Solo casting, they really are the same guy.
Yeah, no, it was perfect casting. But yeah, no, I think it's just an ongoing joke now that he, like, doesn't like it just because.
Well, we'll get more into Harrison Ford not liking Star Wars. We'll get more into Empire, which, I don't know. When I watch it again, maybe I'll feel differently. But I'm just saying, every time I've watched it, I just feel like it's a little overhyped.
I'm just going to say it. It's boring.
That's my critique of it, too. A lot of shit happens in that movie that doesn't matter. Let's not get into that now. We've already pissed off probably everybody listening to this, so they probably already clicked off. If you haven't clicked off, though, and you agree with us, that's great. We'd appreciate a like, comment, subscription. It'd be great if you followed us on Spotify. Or followed us at FireTruthCast on X, Instagram, TikTok. It would mean a lot, and it would really help us out. Next week, we will be doing a very different Nerdcast from what we've done before so far. We're going to return to superheroes, but it's not going to be your typical superhero. This is 90s icon, The Crow. We're going to watch 1994, The Crow. And then we're going to go see the 2024 remake of The Crow. And we're basically going to do an entire nerdcast comparing and contrasting the two films, and obviously ending up with which one is better at the end of our podcast. So we hope you're looking forward to that. We did just drop a fireside chat on the Acolytes cancellation. So if you want to hear us bitch and moan about that, you can go check it out. And the week after, we should be returning to Empire to give our full review on Empire Strikes Back and how boring it probably is. Except for like the key scenes, of course. It has some of the best scenes of all time in it. It's just boring in between.
Yeah, it just drags.
So please don't be mad at us. If you're not, we'll see you again in a galaxy far, far away.